My name is Maxa Zoller. I'm the artistic director of the International Women Film Fest Dortmund+Köln. And I'm here with Tamara Dawit, who is this year's winner of the DIA Award. It's an award that's been given to a female documentary filmmaker from Africa. And it's been born in 2017, and you're the third recipient. Can you tell us just briefly maybe where you were when you received the good news?
Sure. I mean, first of all, I'm so happy to be connecting and talking with you today, even though it's virtual, and hopefully one day in the future we'll be able to be together in person. I was in Toronto, Canada, where I had come to avoid COVID in Ethiopia, sitting on my friend's couch, not, really thinking that it was even possible that I could win. And I think the big lesson that I learned was always be prepared with something to say, because you can win awards and that has to be in the realm of things you should consider as possible. But it was really wonderful to be recognized as a female filmmaker, as an African filmmaker, even though I'm a member of the African diaspora. It was really wonderful.
The award Adaiya takes its name from a Nigerian language, which means the eldest, the first female born in a family. So it symbolizes the role model that you carry forward as an African filmmaker, even though diasporic. And the eldest also brings me to your film that we'll be discussing now, Finding Sally, because the eldest is very important in that family structure that you are documenting. And right from the start, you are connecting to the eldest in the family, to your grandmother. That seems to be the opening shot, the meeting of the two eldest protagonists in your film. Could you maybe just briefly describe the opening scene and then go into a very short description of what the film is about for those who haven't seen it?
Sure. So, I mean, the opening scene for me is one of my favorite moments in the film. It's something that was actually shot in development because I felt it was really important to have both my grandmother and our main character, Sally's mother-in-law, in the film, but they're both elderly women. And I thought I need to film them as soon as possible because, you never know what can happen. And sure enough, my grandmother passed away about maybe a year or a year and a half after that. But they are, as the elders of the family, they're sort of the first keepers of stories. And I wanted to have them reconnect because I learned in interviewing them separately that they hadn't seen each other in maybe 20 or 30 years. And I wanted to bring them back together and also to really have their blessing to go on this journey and do this project. So that's a bit about the opening sequence. The film itself is really an investigation into family, into sisters, and into memory. And it looks at what happened in the Ethiopian Revolution and the Red Terror, which was a period of sustained state-sponsored killings in the mid-1970s in Ethiopia. But it does that through what happened to my family and how my family dealt with one of our members, my Aunt Sally, going missing. And it's my exploration into why did I not know that Sally existed, and why had my family hidden, or maybe not purposely hidden, but stopped talking about Sally and sort of buried her memory.
And along the way, we get to know your aunts, your wonderful aunts, who carry the family story and you through the film. They are Kibra, Brutavit, Zion, Minbere, and have I forgotten one?
Yeah, those are the core ants that are in the film. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you begin your film also by saying that you've been shrouded in the silence around your Ethiopian roots, and you somehow managed to unlock these ants and to bring out not the secret so much, but the silences of the family. It's a very personal film, and you manage to bring your audience along with you, which is maybe only possible in a film made by someone from the diaspora, because we don't know much about Ethiopia here, in the details of it in the West, and neither did you so much. So we both, with you, discover your family history and the history of the country. Was there a specific point at which you decided that this is not going to be only your private and personal research, that you were going to go public with it, which means that, you will make a film out of this question, that private question?
Yeah, I mean, I think I knew about this period in Ethiopia's history. I knew about the revolution because I knew that was why my family, for the most part, was living outside of Ethiopia in the 80s and 90s when I was growing up. But I had no idea that there was a personal connection and that something had happened in my family and my family had been affected. So that was sort of what drove me to want to investigate this. The decision to turn it into a film really came from one of the early conversations I had with my grandmother, because I went back and I was constantly asking her questions about what happened and what did she think and what was she feeling. And she came to me and said, I didn't realize that you didn't know about this. Mm-hmm. And she was troubled because she felt that this means that other younger generations in my family, she's always was hopeful that I would have children or my younger cousins, that they may not know about Sally and about Sally's husband and about Sally's peers, and that generally young Ethiopians don't know about the bravery and the sacrifices and the hope within that generation. And my grandmother said, you have to find Sally's story, you have to archive her story, but it's not just about doing it for our family. Ethiopians need to know about this period and remember it. So that was really the moment that made me say, okay, this has to be something that's more for public consumption than something that's just a personal investigation within the family.
Mm-hmm. And was it hard for you to do that? Because you go into very vulnerable spaces with the interviews, and also for yourself, of course, Was that difficult to do? Do you think it would have been easier had that remained within your private space?
I think it's always challenging to be in the film, to write the film, to direct the film, to produce the film. That's never easy, and I would never recommend that to anyone. It's always better to try and stay within one role. But I think it only worked with me sort of being split across all of those positions. And I think also, what you pointed on earlier, because I'm from the diaspora, because I'm as much Canadian as I am Ethiopian, because of how I was raised, I'm really blunt and bold. And, a lot of young Ethiopians have said to me, I would never ask my elders or my relatives questions the way you ask them. So I think that's my Canadianness that gave me more space to be a bit more bold and push when I thought it was important to really unpack what they were remembering. So I think that certainly helped. And I think it's also a film that required a lot of time to research, to build connections, because, Sally and her husband were part of a secretive communist organization. So a lot of her peers who were involved didn't know who her family was. So when I came knocking to say, I want to talk to you about what you were doing with my aunt in this underground movement, of course, a lot of people didn't want to talk to me right away. So it took time to build those connections, and I think also build trust within those communities.
Yeah, and you do that with great care and patience and emotional intelligence. It's a deeply moving film. I can't imagine if there's anyone out there that whom this film doesn't pick up along the way at one stage. It's really, really impressive how you managed to stay close to the protagonists and the rawness of the emotions, yet structure the film with such an alleged clear direction. Because I'm sure when you started this film, it wasn't really clear which way you would go. But for the audience who haven't seen the film, you start with the search, you take us along the journey, and we end up finding Sally. We end up finding her grave. So there is closure. Who would have known that you can reach this goal in a way to such, satisfaction? So I think that's why, that's made me watch the film again, because I was really, really impressed. And I have great respect for your endurance and resilience, because I'm sure it was very hard. I wanted to talk a little bit about the relationship between what you managed to extract from your aunts and what remained troubled or silenced, and that relationship to the images that you create. Some things cannot be said, but your montage says a lot. So your sisters, not your sisters, your aunts come across as information givers, and they're very amazing, proud Ethiopian upper class ladies. But Kibra is the one that I feel we are able to connect with emotionally the deepest. And it's also Kibra who takes us on her, let's say, the most troubling scene in the film, which is her returning to the room of torture where she was taken to and kidnapped and taken to for interrogation. And we can just say, thank God nothing happened to her, but she returns with you to this torture chamber and has a very, very short breakdown, and very, almost, holds herself up really, great. But then you take us, then I feel like the film enters a different emotional register, because this is the moment where we see the vulnerability of Kibra. And we also enter the moment in which Sally goes underground, because it's only when Sally has to go underground because of the Red Terror that your search doubles in a way. It's not only you who searches, it's also that, then the family, from that point on, your family also searched for her. And you do that in such a smart and soft and tender way by introducing Kibra's painting skills and her painting, what might be landscape or sun on a canvas, and then you bring in her voiceover talking about her experience in the kidnapping, and then you cut through to her entering this torture chamber. So I really felt, with great respect, that you managed to enter their emotional life, which is, I'm sure, not easy to enter. Could you say a little bit about that scene a bit more?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the credit for that scene also goes to the editor, because I think on this type of film, especially when I'm in it and I'm so close to it, I think, editors should be co-directors. they do a lot of the work and bring a lot of the eye and perspective that sometimes you need as the director, sort of outside of yourself. But I mean, I think all of my aunts are remembering the past, the version of the past and the version of Sally that they're most comfortable with. And I think interviewing them was sort of like peeling the layers on an onion, and they all sort of have their different reflections of what the past was. And I think it's often what they're most comfortable with. But Kibra, because she was the person in the family who was there throughout this period, she had the most, I guess, real and in-person connections and memories that were still much more difficult for her to actually reflect to and go back to. But she was also the most willing and eager participant in the family, outside of my grandmother, of why this is important for us to go back and reflect, and why she was willing to go back to places like the Pankhurst family house where she had been kept for many days.
But at the same time, as soft as you are, as independent you are also with your opinions. In another scene that I find very powerful, Kibra talks about the Emperor Haile Selassie's death, and not excuses his actions, but kind of softens maybe some of his political decisions that others would define as brutal and, you know, being a dictator. And the next cut is to television footage of the famine that hit the country right before the revolution started. Of course, it was one of the mega tipping points of the revolution. And so I feel like it's not sarcastic. That scene doesn't drag her comment into sarcasm, but at the same time, you state or your editor, I don't know whose decision it was, state very clearly that there's something not okay. There's something not quite right in, say, shrouding the emperor and keeping him in that place when something like that is happening under his regime.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I think, an interesting, I guess, like, polarity within some of my aunts. I mean, the family outside of Sally, I would say, was for the most part very supportive of the royal family. You know, they were close to the royal family. My grandparents worked with them. So I think that's why you see a lot of their comments about the emperor are framed in that light, which certainly was the feeling of a portion of Ethiopian society. Sally was really the outlier that went in a different direction, but Kibra is also the one of my aunts who saw the famine. She took photos. She was out doing a course, I believe, for her transcendental meditation. And in the process of driving back to Addis, they went through the area where the famine was occurring, and she saw it firsthand. So that was also something that really, I think, gave her a moment to pause and think, because she couldn't deny that this was happening. And I think she, maybe even to this day, hasn't really come to terms with why or how she thinks that happened, or who was responsible, or where would she lay that blame.
Yeah, I think that's what I love about this film so much, that you bear and you tolerate these complexities that, like, in a country like Germany, which is very Western-centric, Eurocentric, and very sure of its own position, you wouldn't allow for such complexities as you're part of the regime that got toppled, yet you are for social rights. You know, there's like a tension that is unresolvable. And of course, that's called life, that's called politics, that's called generational struggle. But I wonder why that's also, you know, the film for me at the end of the day is a spiritual journey. And it's somehow as if you say, well, all politics aside, for me, this was a spiritual awakening. Kibra is at the center of the spiritual journey as well, because she's not only a teacher of transcendental meditation. There's also the scene where she brought the Maharaji to Ethiopia and introduced him to the emperor at the same time that the famine was happening. So, you know, you could be brutal and say, well, you know, you might meditate as long as you want, but, you know, if real politics are happening, you have to switch sides, you have to wake up. But at the same time, I also feel that you really, with the closure that you bring to the family, and also for your own, I mean, it's really, I can really feel how you find yourself. It's almost like not only finding Sally, it's also finding Tamara. You reenact some of the scenes that Sally might have acted. So could you, I know it's not very common to talk about spirituality in the film world, but I felt it very strongly in the film through the transgenerational message and questions and the closure that you brought to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's a film about healing, and it's a film about the journey that my family goes on to investigate these things and to heal. I mean, I remember one of the questions we got from the Canadian broadcaster, who, when they were sending notes on the rough cuts of the film, was around, why is there this content on the meditation? Why do we care about that element within Kibra? And we pushed back on that, myself and the editor, because we felt it's important. It establishes her system of belief, and how her system of belief is different than perhaps the rest of the family, much like Sally's system of belief is different. And I think it helps to helps you understand why does she call for her sister's name when she goes to the village where Sally spent her last days? Why did Kibra manage to survive being incarcerated in this horrible situation? And it kind of helps also understand why I see Kibra sort of often as the anchor that helps guide the rest of the family through this journey. Because that's very much how it was for me in watching my aunts interact when they were traveling together for the film shoot.
Yes, and at the end of the day, it's a spiritual aspect that brings you to Sally's grave, because it was only through her there was something that, you know, when she died, they recognized her being Catholic. Or was it some kind of, was it in her passport, or was it something that she wore?
Yeah, the villagers told us that she had her Catholic ID card or some kind of government ID that noted that she was Catholic, which is also incredibly bizarre because, of course, if you're on the underground and you've assumed a different name, you're not supposed to have any documentation that would explain, you know, who you actually are and where you're from. So, I mean, Sally did many of the things she wasn't supposed to do. She wasn't supposed to be married to another member of her political group. She wasn't supposed to keep in touch with her family or talk about her family. But she did a number of those things because they were also, I guess, equally important to her.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so going back to my initial concern about the diaspora, I'd like to know whether you see a specific role in the position of the diasporic filmmaker. In a way, I wouldn't call it a typical diasporic film, but let me tell you that we had a lot of submissions to the festival by filmmakers of the grandchildren's generation of the post-war and post-independence generation that go back to their parents and grandparents, and with the use of a lot of family archive footage, if there is any, or other means, if there's no archival footage. I almost feel like there's a generational shift from, you know, the parents to the grandparents point of view. And so I received a lot of diasporic family secrets, family silence, you know, undigging of those secrets, undoing them, opening them up. How do you feel like do you have a community, you have like a position in Canada and in Ethiopia that helps you create a network around these kind of questions, or do you feel pretty much on your own?
I think it is sort of shifting between two worlds. I mean, prior to COVID, I've been living in Ethiopia for 5 years because that's where I feel a greater sense of community. That's where a lot of the stories I'm working on, be it as a director or a producer, are set. And as a Black filmmaker in Canada, I didn't feel connected to any community here. There were a lot of, you know, issues in the screen industry here of systemic racism and issues of even being able to get access into institutions and funders. So I do feel a greater sense of belonging and connection within the filmmaking community in Ethiopia. But I also realize that as someone with a Canadian passport, someone who is fluent in English, I have a certain level of access that many filmmakers in Africa don't have. So that's why I really work as a producer, so that I can be the bridge, because my main focus is, you know, to have more narrative sovereignty in terms of the stories being told about Africa by African filmmakers. So if I can be the person that can help an Ethiopian writer director connect to foreign funds, to foreign festivals, to foreign markets, for me, that's the best use of my duality.
Great. Well, we're really looking forward to that, to the harvest, let's say, of all your work. Great. So I think we've come to the end. Thank you very much, Tamara. And we're looking forward to your future projects.
Thank you.